Okay, so we're picking back up. So the electron transport chain of respiration, this is kind of just a review of it all. As you can see, we have the different proteins within the membrane, okay? So we're getting rid of that hydrogen ion, okay, to kind of help pump the electron along the way, all the way through. And then those hydrogen ions is what is powering that ATP synthase protein. So that way we can create ATP from it. So this is within the mitochondria. This is where it's transferring the chemical energy from the food molecules that we eat into the chemical energy of ATP. Here they use the electron carrier of NADH. Okay, now in photosynthesis, this is what it looks like. So it's a little bit different. Okay, so we're in the thylakoid membrane. Sorry guys, we're in the thylakoid membrane. Okay, we still have all of our proteins within our thylakoid membrane itself, but our transporter this time for our electron carrier, it's NADPH, okay? So what happens is we get that light energy from the sun. It hits this protein called photosystem Pt2. I'll explain that later. Okay, so we're getting in that light energy and we're getting in some water here. Okay, from here, we're getting rid of oxygen and we're getting rid of hydrogen ions. Next, we're moving on, okay, to the cytochrome complex. Here, we're getting rid of more hydrogen ions. Then we move on to photosystem 1. Photosystem 1 is also receiving some of that light energy, passing it on to NAD plus reductase, so reduce. Okay, so here we get the H, okay, and then all of that hydrogen ions that we had released up here are going to powering and pumping that ATP synthase. So then that NADPH and that ATP are now moving on to the next step, which is the Calvin cycle. Next, we're going to kind of break all of that down piece by piece to make it a little bit easier. So this is ATP synthase, a review, okay? So for photosynthesis, we get our energy from the sunlight. For respiration, we're getting it from the breakdown of glucose. Now, regardless of where we are getting it, the process is still the same. Where if we're getting our energy from sunlight or from breaking down glucose, we're moving the electrons, running through the electron transport chain pump. This pumps all of our protons, okay, and builds the gradient. And when we have that building of the gradient, okay, the concentration gradient of those protons, it causes ATP synthase to activate, okay, and then bonds that extra phosphate to ADP to get ATP. So here's our question. Take your time, see if you can figure it out on your own. Thumbs up when you have your answer. Just kidding, guys. I know you miss me saying that. So here, if you guys need more time, I shouldn't have to tell you this, just pause so you can read through all of it. I just don't want to waste that much time recording, okay? So here, they want to know, which of the following statements provides evidence to support the claim that no ATP will be synthesized in the absence of a proton gradient across the thylakoid membrane? So we just went over that we need to have a proton gradient in order to have ATP synthase function where it can actually create ATP. Okay, so we would have to actually block the electron transport chain as a whole. Okay, so your answer here is no ATP is synthesized when your channel proteins that allow the free passage of protons are inserted into the thylakoid membrane, okay? Because these channel proteins that are allowing the free passage of protons, that means that they're letting them in and out of the cells. We don't want that. We want to create that higher concentration of protons on the outside, okay? Now, the pigments of photosynthesis. So basically, why are plants green? Okay, how do they get that green color? How do they change their pigments? With yellow and purple and all this other stuff. So chlorophylls and other forms of pigments are actually within that thylakoid membrane. They're arranged in one of the photosystems, which is just a collection of different molecules. It's a basically structure to function relationship. Okay, so in case you've never seen this, we have Roy G. Biv, okay, which is the spectrum of color, and the visible light is Roy G. Biv. So if you are green, you're going to kind of have more of a shorter wavelength, okay, in terms of light energy. So that's kind of where plants are mainly going to be focused in on. Now, the way this happens is how the light is actually absorbed, okay? So photosynthesis gets energy by absorbing the wavelengths of light. It's not necessarily absorbing the light itself, but the wavelengths of the light. So we have chlorophyll A. Chlorophyll A absorbs best in red and blue wavelengths and the least in green. So it's kind of an accessory pigment. Or it's kind of like the main pigment, but there are accessory pigments that have different structures, okay? So you have chlorophyll B, carotenoids, xanthophylls, anthocyanins, and betalains, okay? So chlorophyll B is the one where we're going to mainly be in the green, okay? We're getting close to blue-green kind of here. Okay, carotenoids, that's where you're going to get more of like your yellows or oranges. Okay, so why do leaves change color in the fall? So it basically has to do with the amount of light, okay? And if we're not using all of that chlorophyll or those pigments, then it's going to start breaking down. So for green, okay, it's the dominant color because it's mainly we're getting a lot of sunlight. Spring and summer are usually longer and we're getting a lot of sunlight, so we're staying green. Now we get the red, orange, and yellow when we start breaking down the chlorophyll, okay, and so some of those other pigments are getting more absorbed. So this is just to give you examples of plants. So plant pigments that are protective, it's just going to be your reds, your purples, your blues, and then your actual photosynthetic ones is where you're going to get your chlorophylls, A and B, and then your carotenoids. So now let's go over the photosystems of photosynthesis. So you have two different photosystems in the thylakoid membrane. So they act as light gathering molecules, and we have a bunch of chlorophyll connecting here. Okay, so photosystem 2. Now this is kind of confusing because it is labeled number 2, but it is the first photosystem as you saw in that picture of the membrane. Okay, so in photosystem 2 you have chlorophyll A. Photosystem 1 you have chlorophyll B. Photosystem 1 is actually the oldest photosystem evolutionarily. Okay, so this is the same picture that we looked at before. So we have photosystem 2 and then photosystem 1. So that light energy goes through photosystem 2 first. That's where we have all of our chlorophyll A, and then photosystem 1 is where we have chlorophyll B. So your electron transport chain converts light energy to produce ATP and NADPH. We send those to the Calvin cycle. Now, photosystem 2 absorbs that light. So what happens is you have excited electrons passing from the chlorophyll to the primary electron acceptor. So you need to replace the electron in the chlorophyll. So you get something to help you do that, enzymes. So they extract the electrons from the water that's taken in and supplies those enzymes, or it supplies those electrons to chlorophyll. So that way chlorophyll doesn't continue to lose electrons. So photosystem 2 splits water. The oxygen combines with another oxygen to form O2, which is the oxygen gas that we breathe, and that is what gets released to the atmosphere for us to breathe from the plant. So photosystem 2 is what gives us that oxygen that we breathe. So, light reactions elevate electrons in 2 steps. So we have photosystem 2 and photosystem 1. Okay, so here you can see in the graph photosystem 2, we have our photon, so light. Okay, we shoot up that electron, get it super high up and excited. Okay, from there, we're cycling through our electrons, pushing them along the chain, and from that energy that we are getting, we're making ATP. Okay, so then in photosystem 1, we're going to shoot the electron even higher, okay, so that way it can get to our electron carrier. So PS2 generates the energy as ATP. PS1 generates the reduction power as NADPH. Okay, sorry, that is non-cyclic photophosphorylation. But then we have cyclic photophosphorylation, in which if PS1 can't pass the electron to NADP, it's going to cycle back to PS2 to make more ATP, but no NADPH. If that happens, we're going to have some issues because that means the Calvin cycle is now going to use more ATP than the electron acceptor, which is NADPH. So we would have 18 ATP at this point and 12 NADPH out of 1 molecule of glucose. Now, if you think back to glycolysis and cellular respiration, we got, from breaking down our glucose, we got freaking 2 ATP. For us to take that light energy, just take the energy from the light and break it down, we get 18 ATP. This is why plants are way more autotrophic. They're very self-sufficient, okay, because they make all of the food on their own and they do it very, very well. Okay, so here we're talking cyclic because it cycles back to PS2. So we kind of go in this circle of if PS1 can't do this, then we're going to go back to PS2. But for non-cyclic, if our PS2 can do it, then it goes to PS1 and then it's going to go to the Calvin cycle automatically. Okay, so carbohydrate synthesizing reactions of photosynthesis, carbohydrate, sugar, aka glucose, directly require what? Oh my God, products of the light reactions. So in order to make our glucose, we have to get the products of ATP and NADPH from the light reactions, okay? Obviously, we can't have darkness. Plants don't need oxygen. Yes, they need light, but to actually make the glucose, we need the products of the light reaction. This one is like very, very specific, which is why it's your right answer. Okay, so these are, just funny little cartoons. Okay, so photosynthesis summary so far, we have, I want you guys to think of where did the energy come from? The sun, okay? Where did the electrons come from? We take that light energy and the chlorophyll breaks it down and takes an electron or releases an electron and then takes one from when we're making the oxygen. Okay, so where did water come from? We absorbed it. Where did the O2 come from? From photosystem 2. Where did the oxygen go? We breathed it out through the stomata. Where did the proton gradient come from? The proton gradient came from our electron transport chain. Where did the ATP come from? ATP came from our photosystem 2. Okay, so we take that energy or we take those electrons, and that releasing of the electrons releases our protons. So then our protons will then power up the ATP synthase so we can make our ATP. 18 in total and 12 NADPH. ATP will be used to make glucose. NADPH will be used to carry our electrons. Okay? So if you want a video, you can watch this video. It'll help you out. So now breaking it down in a way that is, not Miss Taylor talking.